Right, it's 10, so let's make a prompt start. Welcome to today's CWU Bitesize learning session about AI. I'm Phil Charrington. I'm a member of the Education and Qualities team. I'll be chairing the session today. We are recording the session and will be available online afterwards to share with any colleagues. So if anybody was unable to attend, or if any of you want to watch any part back, that will be possible. This will be the first of two sessions. Today's session will focus on exploring what AI looks like now. So there will be a discussion of what the technology is and some of its limitations. The second session will be this time next week. So it'll be the same time, same place, same Zoom link. The second session will focus on the impacts of AI in the world of work. We're lucky today to be joined by Adam Cantwell-Corn, who will be delivering both sessions. Adam is the head of campaigns and policy at Connected by Data. Connected by Data is a not-for-profit organisation, helps communities have a more powerful say in the way the data is used, with the aim of creating a more just, equitable and sustainable world. In addition to this, Adam also works for the TUC and is currently their policy lead on AI technology, and has also been working with our telecoms executive to develop their AI knowledge. So Adam is ideally placed to help us understand what AI is and its implications for workers. Just before I hand over to Adam, just wanted to say we will be taking questions. So please, if you have any, put them in the chat and we'll take them at the end. But obviously, if the chat's not working with you, we'll also try and take some verbal questions at the end. So I will hand over to Adam now. If you're ready, Adam.
Thank you very much, Phil, and good morning, everyone. Really happy to be here. Fittingly, I've actually got my CWU AI Awareness Week mug to go with our session today. So yeah, really happy to be here as part of the ongoing project been doing with the telecoms exec. And this morning, just going to do a shortish presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for conversation. I'm really interested in your thoughts and experience and feelings about what we'll be talking about. So I'm just going to share my screen. Um, duh. Cool. So I'm going to start by having pausing a little bit because AI is such a kind of like big conversation at the moment. It's everywhere. It's in seemingly in all of the news, in so much of the sort of like political conversation, and obviously a big concern and growing concern for workers. But like, what actually is AI? And that is going to be the focus of where we're starting today, and for the focus of this session itself, actually. So defining AI is can be done in lots of different ways. The way I define it, or the definition that I use, is this one that I'll just talk through with you. So an AI system is a machine-based system. So far straightforward for explicit or implicit objectives, which means that identifiably or otherwise, it has goals that the system is been programmed to achieve. In order to achieve those goals, it makes inferences from the input, which is the data. And so that might be personal data, it might be business data, it might be driving data, it might be any like call handling or whatever it might be, to generate outputs such as predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions. And I will break that down as we go through, but it's worth just sort of starting with that definition, even though it's a little bit wordy, to make clear that it's based on machines, there's goals, it makes predictions based on data. Um, but then to pause it again and say, like, is this mostly a marketing term? A lot of people will say AI is a sort of snazzy marketing term that has been sort of like dreamt up by companies to kind of make other approaches to computer science like machine learning sound more interesting and appealing to the general public or to people that they want to sell their goods to. And it's worth saying that AI is obviously means artificial intelligence, but really the operative part of that acronym is the artificial piece. It's not intelligent in the same way that we are. It doesn't understand context. It doesn't understand sort of like the world or the in the way that we do. Although obviously it has very compelling and convincing ways of sort of mimicking that in certain respects. And related to that definition is that it's important to understand that if there's objectives, if there's data being selected, if there's goals that are being set, and then there's content or predictions or otherwise being produced, these are really human and political and practical questions. And sometimes I use this little meme, which is of the Wizard of Oz, to sort of kind of like make the case that we should be drawing up the curtain on whoever's using AI systems or designing them, whether that's ourselves, whether that's management, whether that's the big tech companies, and be like behind every AI system are a series of questions and decisions that have been made by people. It's not something that is kind of magical, no matter what people might want to tell us. The third part here to kind of emphasize is that AI is not one technology or application. All AI technology and applications will share those same definitional features that I mentioned at the start, but it can also be embodied within something like a self-driving vehicle or a robot like this one in the bottom right corner that is being currently developed by Tesla, or the use of AI in radiography to do pattern matching and scanning to assist radiographers, facial recognition, and then of course ChatGPT, which is a form of which is the most famous brand of generative AI. But aside from, can people make sure they're on mute, please? Because I hear a bit of feedback coming through. Um, Aside from those sort of like more striking examples, we also experience AI in lots of sort of like day-to-day ways. So Netflix uses a automated recommender system to show you shows to make visible to you shows that it thinks that you want to see based on data that of systems that of systems that shows that you've already watched or shows that have been watched by people that they think are like you. Siri is a form of AI, and Google Maps also embeds AI into its route planning systems. So to dig into a few examples then of these specific ways in which AI manifests, generative AI is the most famous one, and it's become the sort of like thing that's captivated a lot of us. When ChatGPT got launched about 3 years ago, it became sort of exploded into public consciousness. But what actually is it? So generative AI is trained on large amounts of data. So in many respects, companies developing large language models, which is another word for forms of generative AI, will scoop up basically like whatever's on the internet and use that as the basis for its production of like new material. It then uses a form of AI called neural networks, which is kind of like intended to sort of mimic how the brain works, but doesn't quite exactly, to identify patterns among the training data. And then it will create new content in various forms. So it will basically scan every book or journal article or everything on YouTube or Reddit or in newspapers and online magazines. And then if you ask it to give you a summary of a particular news event or historical thing or make a video about something, it will basically scan all of that information and then synthesize that into a new outcome. Um, Now, obviously, there's been a lot of chat about how these are prone to hallucination or issues of accuracy, and that absolutely still is the case, and I'll come on to that. But it is worth saying that these generative AI models have really dramatically improved even over the past couple of years. So this screenshot is actually from a video generation model produced by OpenAI, which is the maker of ChatGPT. And by simply putting in the prompt, two mountain explorers in bright technical shells, ice-crusted faces, eyes narrowed with urgency, shout in the snow, you can make instantaneously a video with sound and with like motion that has this level of reality. So if you look at that image, that looks pretty like almost entirely realistic. I can't spot anything in there that would make me think that that was AI, but it is entirely generated by AI by mishmashing together all sorts of other data sources, including pictures of mountaineers from its training data set to produce this new unique image that obviously has its origins in other information that is within its training data. But while it's powerful, it's obviously really flawed and problematic in certain ways. So, for example, it's increasingly being used in media, but BBC recently, earlier this year, did a study, which is the largest of its kind, that shows AI assistants misrepresent news content 45% of the time, meaning that it's sort of trying to summarize lots of information, but then it's finding they found that in almost half the time it was actually mischaracterizing or inaccurately representing the news. Um, and then you also have sort of like more straightforwardly false or fake news. So the example in the bottom right is that Chicago Sun-Times, which is a big newspaper in Chicago, produced a summer reading list. And then obviously some journalist or otherwise went to an AI model and said, "Give me a Chicago Sun-Times summer reading list," and basically the entire list was made up. Like the books just didn't exist. It was convincing. It looked real. It had the sort of appearance of like a legitimate newspaper article about what you should read that summer, but it was almost entirely fake. Other examples where generative AI is increasingly being used is in computer programming. Computer programming is like useful for AI as a good use case because it's kind of like quite rules based, which means that AI systems can engage with it effectively and efficiently. And the government recently reported that government computer coders are using AI to each save 28 days a year because they're basically able to write more code more effectively and reduce the time they're spending on each individual project. However, there's also evidence that's emerging that when you over rely on generative AI to automate your computer programming, it can give the appearance of boosting productivity, but hidden within those lines of code are actually bugs and flaws and inaccuracies that actually can take a lot longer to then go back and try to fix because you haven't actually gone through the process of scrutinizing and developing it yourself. So another form of AI that we often come across and are concerned about in lots of different ways is called automated decision making. So automated decision making, it analyzes data, it applies an algorithm, and then it prompts or completes a decision. And that can come about in lots of different ways. But for us as workers and trade unionists, we get concerned about the use of automated decision making because it can shortcut processes that we rely on to ensure fair and just outcomes at work. So, for example, a couple of years ago, after a lengthy court case, Uber was fined after robo-firing drivers. What had happened is that drivers were being automatically shut out of being able to access the app on their accounts, and therefore obviously shut out of their workplace and their ability to earn a living without any HR process, without any possibility to contest that decision. And they would basically just get a notification being like, you're no longer able to drive for Uber. And for a large part, there was no human involved in that process. Another example from Uber using automated decision making is the use of what can sometimes called algorithmic pay or dynamic pay, where essentially instead of it being a sort of a set rate for a particular piece of work, like we would expect in other in other parts of the conventional economy, Uber drivers are increasingly finding a dynamic where you get two drivers offered the same job but at different rates of pay. And the algorithm is taking up the data from each of those drivers and basically determining which of the drivers will basically accept a lower rate of pay and setting them in competition with one another to work out which ones will take a cheaper rate so that Uber basically can take more. Part of the way in which it does that is by analyzing the vast data that Uber holds on each individual driver and across the board, and doing that in an automated decision-making process. Also, kind of like more generally, automated decision making is being introduced into public services, which can have like really useful applications for sort of like efficiency or just like getting a new driver's license or doing a check or something like that. But it can also have like really important and significant ethical uh, concerns. So, for example, this was earlier this year. Bias was found in an AI system used to detect UK benefits frauds. So, the government using an automated decision making automated system to flag and identify people who they considered might be or who were committing benefits frauds. But it turns out that like a lot of the ways in which it was that system was designed was basically behaving in a discriminatory way based on age, disability, marital status, and nationality. Um, and by cutting out humans within that process, there's a potential risk that there's like weak accountability, transparency, and oversight of things that have real impacts on people's lives. Um, but yeah, to say again, the same sorts of systems can show up in ways that are much more sort of mundane. So like Netflix shows you a film that you don't want to watch, you just skip over it. But it's the same sort of system, but obviously has much different impacts and considerations to be had. So finally, on this section, it's worth saying that those different types of AI technologies can kind of like combine together to make a product or an application. So if you take machine learning, automated decision making, computer vision, and robotics, you basically get a self-driving vehicle. And what that's doing is bringing together different types of systems to produce a single application. The kind of most recent sort of like hype or frontier of AI technologies is called agentic AI, which similarly brings together different types of systems. And the theory is that agentic AI can act like an agent in the sort of like as like a travel agent type thing, can take control of your computer and complete tasks or entire workflows independently. So you can say, I want to go to the south of France on these dates and I want to stay in a hotel and do these activities. And the idea is that it can interact with your calendar, with your bank account, with a flight booking website, hotel booking, car hire, whatever, and basically sequence all of that together more or less autonomously without you continually having to kind of like steer or prompt it. It is still really early days, and these systems are really risk and error prone. And you can end up with situations like this, where an AI agent, so an automated system to produce code for a reason unknown to the company at the time, went rogue and without being instructed to deleted the company's entire database, causing extreme business catastrophe. Um, Other ways in which different AI technologies combine into what you might call a stack, so different types of technologies kind of like put on top of each other, is like machine learning plus automated decision making to produce target setting and performance management of workers. And that's the sort of technologies that we see used in logistics and in particularly in Amazon. So Amazon collects data on workers and the processing of parcels and items within warehouses to work out basically how to set targets and keep the workers running around that factory as much as possible. Um, so all of that again to say is that like the design and uses of AI include these human, political, and practical questions because it can either be something harmless or more or less harmless, like Netflix one, or the same sorts of systems being used to unjustly penalize people for benefits for they didn't necessarily commit. So again, we do need to pay attention to what sits behind those systems. And I think later on within this program of work, we'll get into how we can challenge the decision making and practices of using AI in the workplace. But it's obviously not necessarily about being pro or anti-AI because AI is different things in different contexts. It's about specific technology and then also who has the power to actually shape it. Um, so then if we think about AI as all of these different types of things, what actually is it in a kind of like summary? I often think about a really useful way to understand it is a type of automation, in that it's systems complete in whole or in part tasks that humans might otherwise do, and importantly, learn and adapt from those tasks. So previously, like in the bottom right corner of this slide, we had traditional automation, which was that a machine would be programmed to do a certain thing over and over and over again, and it couldn't do anything else unless it was reprogrammed. The difference with AI automation is that it can do new things as it learns about the things that it's already doing. in a way that obviously is more akin to how we might learn as humans, although it's obviously not the same kind of like scientifically, but in certain ways it behaves that way. It takes in new data, it processes that data, and then it can adapt to the different environments that it's in, rather than just doing a sort of like repetitive automation, like putting a lid on a can over and over again. Um, Tech related challenges, as kind of like is indicated by that example of previous forms of automation, are um, not new for society, for workers, for trade unions. In fact, we've been dealing with these sorts of things basically since the birth of the trade union movement. So in the top left, like that's an image of the Luddites, who were actually skilled technologists and artisans who, despite this sort of misconception about them being anti-technology, they were actually effectively technologists themselves. They like built and produced looms to create sophisticated textile products. And what they were against is the use of automated looms that would then exploit their labor and de-skill them and potentially push them out of work and drive down their wages. Similarly, obviously, we've had sort of like various different waves of automation within manufacturing. And then a lot of people talk about the use of AI for surveillance and target setting and time management of workers. But like in many respects, that's kind of an extension of the clock. So like in the top right there, there's an idea, there's a book from quite a while ago now called The Tyranny of the Clock, and the way in which the clock was introduced into the factory system as a way of kind of like micromanaging and managing the work and control of the workforce. And whilst AI type surveillance or algorithmic management systems are obviously a sort of different to that, they kind of like carry on in that same trend of different technologies being introduced to manage and innovate the workplace. And I just thought I'd share this interesting and striking image from the TUC, which says "Men on Machines." That's actually from 1936. And all of this is to say that like these are issues that we've been dealing with for lots of, for this is almost obviously a century old, and those same questions are coming up over and over again. And we're kind of like having the same discussions, but applying it to the new circumstances and the new details of the environment that we're in. So a couple of key takeaways to wrap up. AI systems share features, but not a single application. Um, the impact depends how it is used, who is involved, and who gets to be able to shape the sharing of the risks and the benefits. And then on the last point, workers and unions have faced similar issues again, and we will, similar issues before, and we will this time again. And that's the sort of stuff we're going to be digging into in the subsequent sessions after this. Um, and like this is hard and uncertain work. Everyone from businesses to government to unions, charities, whoever are trying to work out what this means for society, for our workplaces, everything that we do. But we do have some of the tools to help ensure AI works for workers. And so, like, yeah, really good to be here to contribute to that. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Adam. That was really, really interesting and thought-provoking. And I'll just go to the floor for questions. If you have any questions, if you could raise your hand. If you're not sure how to do that, you click the React button at the bottom, which has got a heart icon on it, and then there'll be a raise hand button that comes up there. Um, whilst people are doing that, I just had a question, which was in the chat. Rob said about when you were talking about the like journalistic articles having mistakes in them, isn't that a lower percentage of fake news than the actual news? I just thought if you could elaborate on that or like talk about the way that the articles will have been trained on existing journalistic, the models will have been trained on existing journalistic articles, so they're going to be reproducing that kind of mistakes. Yeah.
Was that for me or for Rob?
Yeah. Sorry, it was for you.
Oh, right, yeah. So I don't know if that's a comment on the quality or integrity of the news as a whole, which it might be from Rob. I think but the distinction that was being made in that report is that AI. say you take a news article that's written by a journalist, and that might include bias, it might include fake stuff or whatever. But what they mean is that the AI system has misinterpreted what is actually in that original source information in the summary or synthesis that it produces based on that original source material. So, putting aside that there may be issues with the original source material in the first instance, there's another step that the AI is producing that further kind of changes or corrupts the information integrity through the process of generative AI synthesis of that initial content. So, if I say, my name is Adam and I was born on the 9th of July and I'm living in London, like there might be a lie in there, but the AI is then misinterpreting that and saying, my name is Adam and he's born on the 7th of July and he lives in Cardiff. Like there's a qualitative difference between the AI summary and synthesis from the original source material, even if the original source material might not have the integrity or kind of qualitative aspects that we might expect. But that is actually, I think, a different and more political question in different ways.
So it brings in, there's another opportunity for mistakes to be made. That's what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like for example, like I mentioned that Sun Times article from the Chicago News, like that was basically like entirely made up. Like those books don't exist. And that's a phenomena that people talk about called hallucinations. Another examples are there's been a number of lawyers now that have submitted legal filings for court cases and have included court cases that just do not exist. So it will say Adam versus Phil 2025, and then the opponent lawyer or the judge has then gone to the legal database to look into that case in order to kind of like contest what their opponent is saying, and then revealed it just doesn't, it's just not there. And so what the point is that is trying to make is that, as I was making at the top, AI, generative AI often is very convincing, it's very compelling, but it doesn't have a model of truth or accuracy or context or nuance in the same way that we might have. Even though we might make mistakes or might make lie, it doesn't lie because it doesn't have a sense of consciousness or morality about what a lie is. It basically matches patterns to what it sees within its content training data rather than having some sort of intent or kind of direction setting for what it's doing.
Well, thank you. David has his hand up, so if we could hear from David.
Yeah, Adam. I think AI obviously is the future. I think if it's managed correctly and managed rightly, so we don't have a lot of these issues you just raised. So I think and it reduces the time in relation to doing tasks, like you said. However, AI also can be increasingly frustrating. For example, if you have to ring up a company in relation to something, you want to speak to a customer service advisor or whatever, you inevitably get to speak to someone in chat, which is a robot.
Yeah.
And you're just going round and round in circles because they're not actually answering the question or the problem or the issue you've got, which I think lots and lots of companies are going down that route now, which is increasingly frustrating for consumers in relation to use that. So that's my first point. And my other point is really the point of that is that businesses are using that now and cutting back on jobs because obviously it's not an individual speaking there, it's an actual computer, but therefore it's not actually doing the task that's in hand because it's
Yeah.
not answering that individual's query. Just thought, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, David, I think you're absolutely right. Like, I think often employers will want to use automation technologies to automate labor and therefore like save on costs for that labor. Um, and they sometimes think that the quality of the work that an automated AI system can do is as good or good enough than humans.
Mm.
But some companies are finding out, at least now, that that's just not the case at all. So some of you may have heard of the example of Klarna, which was this sort of Swedish payday loan app, basically. And their CEO basically had the arrogance to say, I reckon an AI system can do the work of 700 customer service agents. They fired 700 customer service agents. because of that. And not long after a massive pushback by their customers and loads of errors and issues, they hired more or less all of them back. Because part of it, the situation is that, and this is something we'll get into later, is that often employers, particularly remote executives, don't actually understand the work that workers do, and they think therefore they can just drop an AI system and replace those workers like for like. But we know that's not the case because there's a different sets of sort of like skills or nuance or kind of like qualities of the work that we might do, which gives us the ability then to potentially push back on it and negotiate around its adoption. But you're right, like it's something that's being pushed a lot by corporations and government at the moment as the sort of like next generation of automation. But from the company side, if they're not careful, you can end up with like really serious issues of that nature.
Yeah.
Not that long ago, Air Canada, the airline, was successfully sued and fined because their chatbot gave incorrect information to a customer, and they ended up missing a flight, I think, because it just gave them the wrong information.
I think it's if it's managed right, you can use it in both ways. You can have a mixture of one and the other. And I think certain times, like when I've rang up regarding companies, I've been going round and round in circles, and it's just not one, it's two or three that use that, and you just don't. In the end, I think you should start off with using the computer generated system, and then if you're not getting the answer right, we'll put you through to a customer advisor. I think that route might be better, but some just use it all the time, and it just, for me, as a customer service, it's pretty poor, to say the least.
Well, in the chat, Rix has asked, isn't it true that the source of the training data could be manipulated in order to secure outcomes desirable for those involved?
Yeah, I think that is true in lots of ways. It can kind of like directly or indirectly. So, for example, Grok, which is Elon Musk's generative AI application, they've obviously trained it on certain data, um, and then added in rules into the system for it to behave in a certain way. So, for example, like there was a scandal not that recently ago where like the it was talking about a white genocide in South Africa and basically spreading fake news that there was a genocide going on against white people in South Africa. That's obviously like entirely false. But what happened is that they trained it on a bunch of data that was making these false allegations, and or added in rules into the system that said, to emphasize the kind of like bias and discrimination against white people as part of Elon Musk's agenda to sort of like push back on anti-racism.
Well, so can I just ask as well about the kind of legal basis that the data that's being used to train the models, where that comes from? If you talk about them using, websites like Reddit or using newspaper articles to train things, is there any legal basis this is? Is that a possible route for regulation or to control them?
So the it's the companies would like to claim that it's a gray area. Certainly in the UK, it's not. And there is a big fight going on because basically anybody who's ever put anything on the internet, including kind of like valuable and copyrighted works, has potentially now been scooped up and being used and appropriated without credit, remuneration, or recognition, um, to be used by large language models for generative AI. So there's a big debate going on in the country about how to resolve that question. And you got people like Elton John and Paul McCartney and big record labels and individual creative workers and others uh, lining up on one side, and then the AI labs lining up on the other side. And their argument is that like if you want generative AI, we can only do it basically if we scrape and use all of this content without kind of having to notify and pay for everyone's stuff. And the other argument from the kind of creative side is that unless we get paid for our work, then we'll see a potential collapse in the creative sector. So the in this country, as far as I understand it, and it gets quite technical and legal, but that they are in breach of copyright, but it's a question of kind of like regulatory and political will and confidence to actually challenge them on that, particularly in the context is that predominantly all American companies, the big companies are all American companies, and then there's the all the politics going on with the British government and the Trump White House and wanting to get investment into the UK and everything else that is kind of obscuring the sort of like more straightforward legal enforcement of those issues. But like a lot of people talk about like artists and creatives, and that's important, actors. But if you think about that screenshot that I showed of you of those two mountaineers, it's not just those. If you wanted to make a video of two mountaineers, at least you have to get two people to pose as mountaineers. But behind that, you've got production assistants, you've got videographers, you've got graphic designers, you've got sound technicians, you've got legal, you've got catering, you've got logistics, potentially 20 or 30 people to make like a short advert. If you can instantaneously produce an advert with sound and motion with this one line prompt, you can see the demand for workers to actually skilled workers to do that work going down because now you can do it in this automated fashion.
Well, thank you very much. Are there any more questions from the floor? Feel free to jump in if you have a question. Katie.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I haven't got my mic on. I do apologise. Just looking at the the biased I can't say the words algorithm. Please, someone say it for
Algorithm.
me. Thank you very much. Obviously, employers are liable, have got legal duties under the Equality Act.
Yeah.
Are you aware of any test cases that have gone to ETs or litigations where employers have been, because of the AI around the recruitment process, that there have been legal test cases going to the courts around discrimination under the Equality Act because it's been biased? Do we know of any?
It's a good question, Katie. Not off the top of my head, I don't know any. Um, there may be, and it's a good question to look into. The part of the challenge is that um, most people don't know when an AI system has been used in any particular process. So it that becomes a barrier to effectively challenging or enforcing your rights around it.
Right, so it's
So
so it's really important then for trade unions to get kind of like collective bargaining
yeah.
agreements on this so that we understand what they're using to make those decisions as part of those AI platforms. Sorry, I need to put my teeth back in this morning.
Yeah, totally. Like transparency is a necessary like starting point for like contesting or negotiating on this stuff. And something that I've been working with Nicola and others on like what would a negotiating uh position, strategy or model collective agreement look like to make sure that transparency is effective because some people talk about like now like the problem of 10,000 pages of transparency. Say you go to the employer and be like, can we have some transparency on what AI systems you're using? And they're like, okay, here you go. Here's 10,000 lines of computer code. What do you think? Like I couldn't read that. A lot of people couldn't. And so there's this idea of effective transparency or explainability where you get the employer or the accountable body to say, this is the purpose of the system. This is how it's been used. This is how we've assessed its impact. This is how we've mitigated its impacts. Um, and we're making all of that information available in a way that you can interact with and engage with it effectively rather than either saying no or sort of drowning you in paperwork.
Oh, thank you.
Well, Rick's has raised a hand.
Hi there. I just wanted to ask, with what's been said so far, I wonder whether we're in danger of someone saying, "Oh, that was an AI decision that was made. We're sorry about that." Who holds ultimate responsibility in a company such as our own when who holds ultimate responsibility when the AI does make a mistake And what would the implications of that be? Would it be, oh, the AI did it, so have a little slap wrist? Because this can have major implication on us all if there's no one who we can hold accountable, because they're driving the use of AI. And I don't have any problems with AI per se, only the way it's implemented and who's responsible for it if it does become more prevalent than it is now.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Rix. Like the short answer is that the deployer, and in this case the employer who deploys the technology is responsible. Like I think that's like clearly established. The challenge, though, which comes back to the thing about was saying Katie, is effectively understanding and challenging a situation where that's been ineffectively used. So if we don't know when it's been used, we can't challenge it, and therefore we can't get the employer to take accountability for a problem if it arises. So the kind of like legal basis is that the deployer of these technologies has to take responsibility in the same way that have to take responsibility for any other system that's in place in the workplace. It doesn't sit outside of those responsibilities and obligations on employers. It firmly sits within it, but sometimes because it's sort of invisibilized, it's not like a truck has been like poorly maintained and then like there's a crash or something like that, which is really obvious to see. Sometimes you don't know why that's you've been sanctioned, or like you've been locked out of your app, or you've had a performance management issue applied against you. You don't know if that's done with the purposes of with the use of AI. So there's a kind of transparency problem there, which is, as I mentioned, needs to be a kind of like starting point for us.
Can I just follow up on that and say that there are decisions that appear to be being made within the company already? Perhaps not AI, but it's certainly machine learning or clever programming, as it were. And we're getting outcomes where people are being sent on driving courses because their driving doesn't conform to a set of standards set in software, and they're not being told why they're being sent on the course. So
Mhm.
I worry, and there's a particular person on the call who's been through this twice now. Yeah, we're going to send you on a course because it's been highlighted by this piece of software that you
Mhm.
understand it, but we're not going to tell you why.
Yeah.
And I worry that could escalate when we start incorporating machine learning and AI in the future.
Yeah, it's a good point. My first point on that is that, like, as I started off, like AI is a contested term. Some people think it's a marketing term altogether. But it's basically an umbrella term. And so I think from the union's perspective, it's important to not kind of like get waylaid about whether or not it's AI. Like if decisions are made about people that affect people's like terms and conditions, their rights or whatever, like we should know about it and we should be able to have a fair explanation about why it is, whether that's manual or using AI system or using a kind of like traditional digital system. It doesn't matter. But the thing about AI that brings it in is that sometimes the employers don't know either, or managers don't know. A lot of people talk about, oh, the need to skill workers or reskill workers for this, but we should be absolutely making the case that managers and executives also know what they're doing so that they can effectively explain why a decision has been made in order for an employee to understand and accept it, or for them and their representatives to contest it where appropriate.
Thank you.
Well, there's a couple of points raised in the chat, which if we could address. So Helen says she's read that there's some concern amongst AI labs that are generating systems which they themselves don't even understand. So is there a risk of a kind of loss of control from companies on this? And then Rob asks, isn't admin, middle management, and HR going to be hit first in terms of job losses? So is there a greater risk to certain job roles than others?
Yeah, so yeah, that's right, Helen. Whilst obviously like there's a lot at the sort of what's called the frontier, the sort of like the most advanced development of large language models, generative AI, some of the companies don't understand why the systems are behaving in ways that they are. sometimes called the black box problem, that there's a part of the system that even though they know what training data is going in, they know what rules have been written, is producing unpredictable outcomes or behaviors which they don't necessarily fully understand. That's usually at the sort of like more advanced and complicated system level rather than the sort of like automated decision making aspect, which is much more kind of traditional or like basic machine learning processes where it's gone like if this happens, then the machine should do that. But it is certainly the case that there is a concern amongst some people of, super intelligent AI systems kind of like going rogue and doing things that its human creators or society doesn't want it to do. It's a debate to what extent that is actually happening, but it is true that the at certain parts of this industry and of the technology, not everyone can explain why systems do what they do, even if they're the ones developing it. On the question about job losses, so I think the more helpful way to think about how this impacts work is less about jobs losses as a whole and more about tasks. So if we think about jobs as a set of different tasks, what are the tasks within your job role, within any given job role, that an AI system can do in whole or in part? And the reason why people talk about HR, admin, those sorts of roles being potentially most impacted, is because of the tasks that they do, sending emails, writing research, writing briefing notes, organizing transport events, that sort of thing. The theory is that AI systems can do more of those tasks than currently like a plumber can do. Like a plumber might be able to use AI systems to help to diagnose an issue, but at the moment we don't have like robotics that can get under your sink and effectively fix your sink.
Well, thank you, Case. In the chat, Case just put a link to some of the work that global unions such as the TUC have been doing about pushing for regulation on AI. And I just wondered, Adam, if you could talk to some of the work you've been doing with the TUC and how kind of CWU's work fits into broader work that's going on with other
Yeah.
unions.
Yeah, so like the union movement is like, making moves on this. And the TUC last year developed a model piece of legislation that basically sets out what we consider to be the sort of a robust set of rights and responsibilities for workers and employers for the use of AI systems at work. And what it does is it basically says this is how transparency should work, this is how consultation, this is how redress and accountability, this is how it should be explained. This is the specifics of like what should be included in an impact assessment to fill a hole that is currently within UK law and regulation, which means that there is an environment where like there is, as we're picking up with Rix and Katie, employers using these systems without really understanding it themselves and without being able to explain and make transparent to people who are on the end of it. The other part is the sort of issues around kind of like its wider impact on jobs and job losses. So TC's doing work to lobby the government, to hold companies to account, to boost collective bargaining, to think about social security systems and like reskilling programs for people who are displaced from work, who are not able to find good work, as is some evidence suggests like younger workers are experiencing, and to use it's different set of kind of like tools and levers that can support that. For example, the UK government is a massive purchaser of AI systems and digital systems generally into the school system, into the NHS, into central government, spending billions every year. And what we're saying is that there should be conditions attached to those billions of money that is being spent on private companies, and say you need to treat your workers right, there needs to be ethical standards, there needs to be accountability, and also making sure that we're not becoming overly reliant on a handful of small American tech companies, and that we're actually building our own capabilities in-house so that we're not basically in a kind of the ongoing dynamic of outsourcing, but in this case with technology instead of sort of like direct services.
Well, thank you. Can I just add to that that Welsh Government have published guidance on the way that AI should be introduced in the Welsh public sector, which addresses many of those demands. So this is something that we can reasonably expect a Labour government to produce and to work with us on.
Yeah, and then the coming up soon, hopefully soon, is that the government will be consulting on the use of surveillance technology at work. And this was a commitment that they made prior to the election with the unions, and particularly the unions that are affiliated to the party, which includes obviously the CWU. They said in their pretty strong commitment that surveillance technologies wouldn't be able to be introduced without the sort of consent of unions or worker representatives. That hasn't come through within the employment rights bill, but is hopefully coming through in a sort of like separate piece of regulation or policy. And that's something that the TUC is kind of actively engaging on. And when that comes forward, we'll definitely be sharing and working with CWU and others to sort of like make sure that we get the right outcome from that.
Well, thank you. Are there any more questions from the floor? All right, last chance, so I'm going to wrap up. No, bro, if you have any further questions, save them for next week. Because next week, I'm just going to remind you there will be a second session focusing on the impacts of AI in the world of work. Second session, as I said, will be this time next week in the same place, same link. I just wanted to thank Adam for presenting today and answering so many wide-ranging questions there. We gave you a bit of a grilling, but thank you very much for doing that. And we look forward to seeing you next week. So thank you, everybody, for coming and looking forward to seeing you again next week. Well, thank you very much.
Cheers, Phil. Thanks all.
Right, bye, everybody.